So welcome to the first day of AP Micro lessons. Today we're going to talk about socially efficient and inefficient market outcomes. My name is Mr. Pedlow. I teach in Chelsea, Michigan at Chelsea High School. Big welcome to all of you, even some of my students who are probably tuning in. So you might be wondering why there's some review from Unit 6 on the AP Classroom if you've been told this is not going to be on the AP exam. So I want to start out talking about this. Colleges are still giving credit, even though this test is probably going to be 2 free response for a 45-minute test. And in doing so, colleges were concerned that kids had not gotten the full course load. So that's why we're teaching you this for the first few days. It's to extend the rest of the year, because when we set up the curriculum, it was a full year or a full term course of microeconomics. And we as educators want to make sure you guys get everything in there. So there are a couple things over the next 3 days, next 4 days that we're going to go over, which will not be on the test. But it's good you guys know this. In addition, we're teaching you the skills you guys are going to need to know to do well in the free response. So hopefully that answers your question of why you're doing some review that potentially won't be asked on the test. The second thing is, today we're going to actually do quite a bit of the things that are going to be on the test. There's quite a bit of review today. So after the first week or so, when we get through this Unit 6 stuff, every day is going to be review. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the beginning of the course and spend every day going through 1 or 2 different topics. The big push that I'm going to do with you guys, because it is free response, we're really going to focus on free response. Every day, you guys, okay, you're not going to have homework. We're not going to waste your time. But every day we're going to do a free response. And the next day, when we tune back in at 3 o'clock, the first thing we'll do is go through that free response with you guys. So welcome, and here we go. So today, when talking about this, if you guys, the one thing I'm going to request that you guys bring every day is something to write in. So either a notebook and a pen. That's all you need, is something to write on. I'm going to draw some graphs with you guys today and go through exactly what deadweight loss is, what efficiency is, and those kind of things. So we're going to keep the notes part of this lecture pretty small. I would much rather focus on the graphs with you guys. So the first thing I want to do is, because we haven't had a previous session to go over, I just want to throw up a question for you guys, and take about 1 minute, read through this, and we'll go through this. All right, so you've had time to read the question, look at some of the answers. So let's go over some review. First of all, most of you guys have had some phenomenal teachers. You've already gone through market structure, either in the fall when you took micro, or maybe a month or 2 ago before school was let out. And you guys probably remember that everything comes down to marginal cost equals marginal revenue, right? And they really harped on that. So if you originally go where MC equals MR right here, and that's where you're going to set your quantity. If you go up to your price, your demand curve, and then over, that's where you're going to set your price. So everything above that, if you look on your screen, everything above that is consumer surplus. And what this question is asking about is what's going to happen to consumer surplus if they produce the allocatively efficient level. So that's what we're going to spend some time talking about today. So allocatively efficient is where price equals marginal cost. The big thing I've noticed over the years with kids is they like to say, well, what price? We understand our marginal cost curve is here. Well, keep in mind, your demand curve is made up of prices people are willing and able to pay. So it's where your marginal cost crosses your demand curve. On an AP test, you would want to say, if it was for an explanation point, you'd want to say it's where marginal cost equals your price. So if we know right here is your allocatively efficient level, so Q2, and set at a price of P4, then your consumer surplus is everything above that. So we've gone from HJP5, and now we're at HKP4. So you can immediately look at A and B and say, well, those aren't right because it increased. And if you get to C increased by the area of P5J down to G, well, you know that's not right. That's not consumer surplus. So you go to D, P5J, KP4, and there's your answer. So I know you guys aren't going to have to do a multiple choice, but the multiple choice that we practice, the reason we're doing this, it's what will get you the most points in a free response? So let's start today with a few notes over allocative efficiency. And allocative efficiency is simply defined as P equals MC, okay? It's where price equals marginal cost. And on a market graph, so easy to remember this, kids often on AP tests see, well, it's a perfectly competitive market, and they start thinking about firms, and they think perfectly competitive. Something needs to be perfectly elastic. It's a market. Markets are X's. So remember that. You're drawing supply and demand if you get to a question that asks about a market. At equilibrium, that's also known as socially optimal. And we're going to look at why here in a sec. And the last thing I want you guys to make sure you know about socially optimal is total economic surplus is maximized. So it's not the consumer surplus is maximized, it's not the producer surplus, it's your total economic surplus is maximized. So those are three things to know. The big one is price equals marginal cost. And if you look at a graph, okay, a couple things you'll notice. That over here I have not just demand, but demand equals marginal benefit and supply equals marginal cost. And let's talk about that for a minute. So let's say this is for chocolate, it doesn't matter, okay, pizza, we'll use that. So at this demand curve, people are ordering pizza, right? Say they want a sliced pizza. They have a very high marginal benefit. Remember, marginal is additional. So as they get another slice, their additional benefit is very high. They're hungry. If you remember the 3 reasons demand curves slope downward, which we will talk about here in a week or so, a couple of weeks, is one of the big ones is diminishing margin utility. You get less and less benefit, less and less satisfaction as you consume more. So up here, really high marginal benefit. And for a producer, right, which is a supply curve, and I'm sure your teachers told you, supply is made up of cost, what it costs to make. Very low marginal cost, right? They can kick out a sliced pizza, not a big deal. So as we meet here at equilibrium, right, and your teachers all told you equilibrium is where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Well, if you look, it's also where marginal cost equals marginal benefit. And we can take this one step further. So there's a couple notes here, and you don't necessarily have to write all this down, but notice, right, that we have MB and MC listed as well. And on the AP test, if they told you to draw a market, you would just write supply and demand. You wouldn't write equals marginal benefit. We're just showing you this because I want you guys to understand what it means to be socially optimal. If you're at equilibrium, then clearly marginal benefit equals marginal cost. In addition, this is known as socially efficient. As long as there's no externalities. Externalities are fun to learn about. We get to talk about them the next 2 days. But if there's no externalities, then in addition, and you could add one more thing on this graph, which would be this equals marginal social benefit. So there we are. And the marginal cost, you can see my writing's bad enough, let alone using a pen on PowerPoint. Okay. And marginal cost would be marginal social cost. So there we go. We're at socially optimal when we're at equilibrium in a marketplace. So far, nothing too tricky. But what's deadweight loss? So deadweight loss, you will be asked about most likely on the free response. It's a very big part of the micro course. The simple definition, it's a loss of total surplus. So they could ask you how much deadweight loss was lost, or how much consumer surplus was lost because of deadweight loss. We'll walk you guys through, show you how to do that. But overall, they typically ask, where's deadweight loss? Or they ask you to calculate it. Today, we're going to look at how to calculate that as well. And deadweight loss occurs anytime you get away from equilibrium. And there's typically 2 reasons. Either there's an externality in the marketplace, or there's some type of government intervention in the marketplace as well. So deadweight loss, it's a loss of total surplus in the marketplace, and it occurs when you get away from equilibrium. I am not concerned that you guys know exactly why, but typically your teachers have taught you things like rent control, taxes, subsidies, things of that nature have gotten moving the market away from that equilibrium point, or what we call the socially optimal. Okay, same thing as allocatively efficient. Okay, so I'm going to go through the graphs. You don't need to write this down, but make sure you have your notebook, would be handy. And so here are the graphs that we're going to talk about. Okay, these are what show deadweight loss. So your monopoly, your imperfectly competitive markets, right? What doesn't show is perfectly competitive market, because we're going to show you here, but price equals marginal cost. So here we go. Why don't we do this? Okay, I'm going to draw some with you guys. Okay, so the first graph, you can write this down. We'll look at rent control. And I'm sure your teachers talked about rent control. It's something that certain cities around the world try and implement. It's a way for the theory behind rent control, keep rent low enough that the average person could afford. If you look at New York, if you look at San Francisco and the housing crisis they're having, one of the calls from certain people are, why don't we have rent control so people could afford to get it, okay? We are certainly not going into the politics of rent control in this lesson though. So on your market, right? Supply, demand, equilibrium. When you guys get to your AP test, make sure you label everything. If things are going to shift, use arrows, make it easy on the reader. This year will be a little interesting if you guys are, who knows, taking pictures and uploading them. Make sure it's very easy to grade. So when you have rent control is a price ceiling. And if you guys remember, floor is high, ceiling's low. It's a maximum price you could put on something, right? So your teachers probably taught you that. It's easy to remember. Floor or ceiling, yeah, floor high, ceiling low. So let's put a price ceiling down here. And you can just go ahead and label it PC for price ceiling. And make your line over, right? Now, once you do that, what's important to see here is where it's hitting the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded. So stay on your, so this would be so let's say if we had numbers here, okay? You guys don't need to write these numbers. Let's say that the average one bedroom is running for $1,000 and the local mayor says it's just too expensive. And from now on, you cannot charge more than $700 for a one bedroom apartment. Okay, so those will be the prices. Right, that's what you're looking at here, just so we're all on the same page. If you go over to your supply and you make your dotted lines down, this is quantity supplied. Okay, QS. Hope you guys can see that. If you stay on that line, go all the way to your demand curve and down, it'll be labeled QD, quantity demanded. Now, you guys probably remember, right? What is created when you have a price ceiling? It is a shortage. And how do you know that? Because, and what you would write down is your quantity demanded is greater than your quantity supplied. So that's what a shortage is. We want more apartments than they're willing to give us. Now I'm going to answer a big question that gets asked every single year, which is, kids are rational, they're smart. And they start thinking this stuff through and they're like, wait a minute, apartments don't just disappear. They don't have legs, they don't leave cities. But there's a simple way to look at this. Think about, let's say you're going to the University of Nebraska, you live in Lincoln, I love Lincoln. And you're downtown and you're renting a house, right? And the house is rented for 7 bedrooms. And when I was in college, I lived in an actual closet. Hopefully, if they ever sold that house, people would not put their toddler in there because it was an actual closet once again. So you're renting it and you're making $1,000 and it's a 7-bedroom house. Once again, a couple closets. And now you can't charge $1,000. That's $7,000 and now it's only $700. So what might you do? You're going to put it up for sale, let a family buy that. The money's not there anymore. So that's why you went from this equilibrium, this quantity, and it's going to be a lower quantity. And then obviously people are going to potentially move in if they think there's cheaper housing. So here's the key here. If this is socially efficient, we'll label this QS, that's socially efficient. We're no longer there, we're back here. So what you guys need to do is make your dotted lines go up to your demand curve, and you just found a couple things. So and I'm not going to shade this right now. The first thing you found right here is if you go on your demand curve and down, this is consumer surplus, all the way from your price ceiling up. These are the consumers who now have a cheaper apartment. They're thrilled. They love it. People get in rent-controlled apartments in New York, and they never want to leave, right? They're paying cheaper rent than the market should be charging. So there are some people getting apartments, and the bad news is if you own the apartment, your producer surplus is down there, right? It's really small. You should be getting higher. So there are people willing to rent for these lower prices. They're probably not the greatest apartments. So what's created? So go ahead and shade in this triangle right here. Okay? And that's that term we just learned, which was deadweight loss. So remember, it's a loss of total surplus. Originally in the marketplace, consumer surplus was up here. Producer surplus was this whole triangle down here. And now consumer is this, producer is this tiny little thing, and that's a deadweight loss. So once again, it's a loss of total surplus. Easy graph to start out with. I know most of you are probably thinking, my goodness, we did these months ago. So let's go to a tax graph next. So go ahead, draw your supply, your demand. And for this example, we'll just assume that the tax is going to affect the suppliers, the producers, okay? It could be a tax on cigarettes, doesn't matter, okay? So let's shift supply to the left You can label this supply plus a tax or just S plus T. Okay. Use a good arrow here, make sure the reader knows exactly what you did. This becomes, if you recall, the price buyers pay. So originally, consumer surplus, this big triangle, the original consumer surplus. Producer surplus, this big triangle down here, correct? But now, consumer surplus, they're paying a higher price. Now your consumer surplus is this up here, okay? That's that smaller triangle right there. And then, make your dotted lines down all the way. You can label this Q, T if you want, quantity with a tax. And stay on this line, go up to your original supply curve, because at this quantity, producers this quantity of producers will supply at this price. So this is now the price the seller receives. Okay. So what happened to producer surplus? It went from this big box and now it's down to this little triangle down here. So clearly we've lost some surplus. Well, this is a tax. Some of that is going to be made up with government revenue. Hence, it's a tax. So the tax is PB minus PS if it were a per unit tax. So every time they sold a, whatever it is, a better example, they tax orange Doritos, which hopefully they never do. But if they tax orange Doritos because it's junk food and they shift the supply left, every single time there's a bag of Doritos sold, the buyer pays a higher price, seller gets lower price, and the government is going to take this box right here. And once again, I don't want to shade it, but you guys understand, right? We're talking this whole thing right here, the government tax revenue box. So how would you get that? It'd be QT times PB minus PS, right? That's your tax revenue. And then once again, what we're working on today, and don't worry, we're going over tax graphs here in a couple of weeks. So please don't think this is the only time we're going to see this. But what we want to focus on today, once again, is there it is, our deadweight loss. Okay, it's a loss of total surplus. This much consumer, this much producer down here. And so we've gotten away from socially efficient. Last two graphs real quick. We'll look at a monopoly graph. We are in, as I said, we're going to go through all these graphs here over the next couple weeks. And you guys will know every single point in these graphs, how to get credit for it, what the AP wants you to know. So if you look, your marginal cost is increasing. Remember, it typically falls, but then rises due to, and if you just said to yourself, diminishing marginal returns, congratulations, you've been taught well. And your demand curve is greater than your marginal revenue curve. We're going to go over why. We're not going to get into that today. But remember, this right here, this point right here, where marginal cost equals price, that is once again known as allocative efficiency. That's where we are socially efficient. If you go back to that graph that I showed you guys, here's our supply curve. Here's our demand curve, meaning we're at equilibrium. But a monopolist, because there are barriers to entry, is not going to produce that quantity. So what they're going to do is they're going to produce a lower quantity, and then they're going to set a higher price. They're going to go up to your demand curve and over, and they're going to charge that price. Don't worry about your average total cost. We're going to get there. So what's created? A deadweight loss. This was surplus, producer and consumer, and now there's your deadweight loss. So if they ask a question about, if the monopolist becomes allocatively efficient, what would happen? Well, your consumer surplus, if they're a monopoly, is this up here. It's this triangle, okay? This whole triangle. If they become a perfectly competitive firm, right, allocatively efficient, it would be right there. And then consumer surplus, you would gain this area. It'd be the whole triangle right there, okay? And then the last one is, and you don't necessarily have to draw this one because we're not going to show deadweight loss. Just want to show you. Once again, marginal cost, that's our supply curve. And yes, I know in the short run, it would be above average variable cost. We're just keeping it simple today. Here's your demand curve. Remember Mr. DARP. So your average revenue, your marginal revenue, easy way to remember it. That shout out goes out to ref. And then your quantity line right here. So you have your price, your quantity. So once again, marginal cost, right? Here we are at equilibrium. So that's allocatively efficient equals marginal revenue, or supply equals demand at that quantity. So in this case, there is no deadweight loss. We're already at allocative efficiency. All right, perfect. Now you guys are ready to move on, and we'll do some multiple choice. All right, here we go. We'll go back to the PowerPoint here. Let me share this with you. All righty. So a couple of these I'm going to go through with you guys, and then we'll have time to finish up with some free response here in a sec. Okay. All righty. So a couple multiple choice questions. Which of the following is likely to result in allocative inefficiency? So once again, don't get tripped up. When you're reading the free response, 45 minutes long, you have plenty of time to read through these, right? They're asking about inefficiency. So A, oligopoly market structure. And if you think to yourself, gee, my teacher, when we talked about oligopolies, I remember game theory. So let's skip that one for right now. Go to B, a firm producing at the level where price equals marginal cost. Well, that is the definition of allocative efficiency. And you know B can't be the right answer. C, perfectly competitive and equilibrium. Well, that's what we just drew. That can't be right. D, a perfectly price discriminating monopoly. So in a perfectly price discriminating monopoly, which we'll get to here in a couple of weeks, that's where they set the quantity, guess where? At allocative efficiency. But there's no surplus, but there's also no deadweight loss. They charge consumers every single price they're willing to pay. And then E, a monopolist that faces a minimum wage. If some of you, your head's just about spun when you saw the words monopolist, or monopsonist, excuse me, don't worry, we're going to get there. It's a labor graph. Let's go back to A, okay? An oligopoly market structure. Oligopolies are markets with few firms. They are not going to set the price where it's allocative efficient. They don't have to. They have market clout. So they're going to set a higher price. So A is the answer. It's inefficient. We're not socially efficient because they're going to charge a lower quantity and a higher price, and there would be a deadweight loss created. The next one, once again, no externalities, which tomorrow we're going to learn about, which finds true of a competitive market and equilibrium. So we already said A and B weren't true. They might be. C, marginal benefit exceeds marginal cost. Well, no, at equilibrium, we already drew out that MB equaled MC. And so D, your marginal social benefit equals marginal social cost. Perfect. So that comes directly from that original graph that I had up on the computer. And then the last multiple choice, and typically each day, a few multiple choice, especially for explanation reasoning. I think it's important sometimes to say why certain things are wrong, and then we'll hop into the free response here in a sec. So the socially optimal quantity of a public good is provided. And once again, we're talking about public and private goods on Monday. And once again, so when you see socially optimal quantity, think to yourself, socially optimal, it's where your marginal social benefit equals your marginal social cost. So B jumps right off the page. Okay, it's not necessarily A and C. Remember in micro, everything's looking at the margin. You're next additional, right? So the easy way to think about this is, should we clean up all pollution in the world? And from an economic standpoint, no, right? You clean up until your marginal benefit equals your marginal cost. And if the next time you cleaned up, your marginal cost would be too high, then you wouldn't do that. They don't look at totals, right? Everything's at the margin. So we're going to do two free response today. The first is from a few years ago. Love this question. So take a minute here. If you guys have your notebooks handy, you can use those because obviously you can't write on the screen too well. So I'm going to do this one with you, and then I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to look at the last one, and then we're done. Easy day, probably 35 minutes total. You guys will have plenty of time. I know you probably have a 4 o'clock viewing, a 5 o'clock macro. I know that's out there as well. So A, calculate the total producer surplus at the market equilibrium price and quantity and show your work. Okay, so one thing I should have told you is when you're looking at that deadweight loss, right, and this goes back to your geometry classes, find the area of a triangle, right, it's 1/2 base times height. You guys all know that. We can move on. So if you look at your total producer surplus, okay, if I grab here, try and do this. So at equilibrium, so here's our equilibrium price quantity, okay? Price $20, they're selling 20. So if we can take 1/2 base times height, 20 times 20 is 400. 1/2 of that is $200. So your producer surplus is this right here, okay? I don't want to shade it in because it's going to interfere with the next couple. So if you got A right, easy. I know, by the way, I know that when we do these free response, a lot of you guys might say, you know, we've done this one in class. Most of your teachers have probably done almost all of these. It's really good review because obviously this is a free response test this year. So the more free response we can get through in the next 20 days, the better. B, if they impose a price floor at $16, okay, so if the equilibrium price is 20 and you say to yourselves, floor high, ceiling low. Price floors are minimum prices. So if the government came in and said, right here, the minimum price you can charge from now on, you can't charge anything less than $16. Okay, that's a price floor. What is that going to do to the market? And the answer is nothing. They're not charging any less than $16. They're charging more than that. So the price floor would have to be somewhere up here in order to be effective. So the answer for B, neither, and that you could write down because it's not binding. And when we get to price floors and price ceilings, we'll talk a little bit about what that means, binding and non-binding, but it simply means it's not going to affect the marketplace at all, okay? And then C, if they impose a price ceiling at $12, is there a shortage, surplus, or neither? So at $12, if you go over, okay, right here is your quantity supplied. And if you look at that, that's down here, 12 units. But if you stay on that line, okay, consumers are demanding 24 units. So you and I want to buy 24 units of the good, the widgets, and they only want to give us right here 12, okay? So they're asking, what is that? Well, that's a shortage. And there's a couple answers you could write down. You could write the simple answer, which is it's a shortage because quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. Or you could say because quantity demanded equals 24 and the quantity supplied is only 12. Okay, you can use the numbers from the graph, which is always good. And then last but not least, D, if the government restricts the market output to 10 units, calculate the deadweight loss. Okay, so here we are on what we've done today, right? This whole idea of efficiency. They talked about price floors, price ceilings, and now they want to know actually how do you go find your deadweight loss. So remember, this is allocative efficiency, and we're going to move away from that. So at the market, the equilibrium, 20 people want to buy the good. Now they're going to restrict it to 10. So what you guys need to do is you just kind of make a line all the way up to your demand curve. All right. So at this quantity, there were 10 people who were willing to pay $40 for widgets. They really like widgets. So they want to pay a high price for them. And at this price, there were producers who were willing to sell them for $10. Okay. So your deadweight loss now, because we have moved away, the quantity originally was 20, but now there's only 10 out in the marketplace. So you guys now know this whole area, right? And here, if we just made some quick lines across here, this is in fact our deadweight loss. We've moved away from our allocative, oops, that's really bad, efficiency. Okay, please don't grade me on my drawing skills on PowerPoint pens. We'll get better at this, maybe. All right, so let's do the math. Okay, 1/2 base times height. So 40 minus 10 is 30. And then you're going to multiply that times 20 minus 10 is 10. So 30 minus 10 is 300. 1/2 of that is 150. Easy stuff. So once again, it was 40 minus 10, which is 30, times 20 minus 10, which is 10. So that's 300. 1/2 of that is 150. So hopefully today you got the idea of what it means to be socially efficient, allocatively efficient in the marketplace, why equilibrium is allocative efficient. That's what we want you guys to get out of this today, and how to show it on graphs and why it is, like tax and subsidies and price floors, price ceilings, things that move you away from that equilibrium. So for the last couple minutes, all I wanted to do with you guys is give you another free response, because we can't just have one today. It wouldn't be fun for day one. So what we're going to do on this free response is I'm not going to walk you guys through it at all. Okay. I want you guys to take some time. If you're watching this later, not live, you can pause it. These are going to be recorded and put up on YouTube every day. So you can go back, and if there's specific ones, what I always tell my students is to make notes or highlight any they didn't understand. That's the best way to study, right? Once you've learned something, it's pointless to keep studying it, but the stuff you highlight, go back and say, all right, exactly why did I miss point C on this? And you can go back and understand where you get the credit for that. So on this one, I know it's kind of small. There's a lot of questions. All I'm going to do is run through the questions with you guys, and then we're done. So it's a monopoly, and it says A, how do they determine the profit maximizing level of output and price? B, identify the profit maximizing level of output and price. So A, they're asking, all right, how do they get it? B, they want to make sure you know exactly where it would be shown on the graph. B2, line segment of the demand curve that is elastic. If you're saying to yourself, this is a lot right now, right? This is review. I'm assuming you guys have all gotten to market structure and monopolies by this point in the course. And if you haven't, well, we'll get there. So for most of you guys, this is where the review kicks in. C, industry depicted in the graph becomes perfectly competitive identify the price and output. All right, we did that today. Now we're talking allocative efficiency once again. Then they get to D, they want you to identify consumer surplus for a monopoly, and then if they become allocatively efficient. E, all right, they've led you this allocated efficiency, so E, define it. F, does a kid actually know where it is? You guys should by this point, based on what we did today. And then G, would they use a tax or per unit subsidy to get them there? And then explain why or how. I clearly understand there are things in this free response that are a little more review, but that's why I'm doing it for you guys. I want to start out with review every day from something, and even if we go over this later when we get to monopolies and tax and subsidies and things, it's good. It's just more review for you guys. So take a couple minutes. If you just want to jot the notes down, why don't we take about 3 minutes? And I'm just going to sit here and keep track of your answers, and then we'll be all finished up. So hopefully if you guys are doing this, you're finding it rather easy based on what we did today. If it isn't reviewed for some of you guys, it might be a little more difficult, but this is what we call question number 1 in econ, right? One of the longer questions. You're going to see one of these in the AP test. My guess is, and no one's come out and said exactly, you're going to see a longer question and then probably a shorter question like a number 2 or number 3, because you only have the 45 minutes. I know G seems like a lot, but you guys have 45 minutes to do 2 questions. They could theoretically make these even longer. So I like making sure you guys get a chance to see one of the longer questions on most of the days, so you can get used to that tempo of going through and knowing exactly what they want you to do. So that's it for today. If you guys need more time to go back through this, these are being taped. You can just go on YouTube and look at the microeconomics. I really hope I see all of you guys back tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and enjoy your day. You guys stay healthy.